10%. That's the number. Before electricity, the average working-class family in England spent nearly 10% of their entire income on candles. Not on food, not on rent, on light. 10% just to see after dark. Think about what that means for a moment. If you earn $50,000 a year today, that's $5,000 a year on candles, every year, just to push the darkness back a few feet. And if you couldn't afford it, and most people couldn't, not really, you stopped working when the sun went down. You stopped reading. You stopped seeing. The darkness won. Every single night. We live in a world so flooded with light that we have to buy blackout curtains to sleep. We have never, not once, had to think about whether we can afford to see after sunset. That experience is so alien to modern life that we can barely imagine it. But for most of human history, light after dark wasn't a comfort. It was a commodity. And the object that provided it, a simple stick of wax with a piece of string through the middle, shaped economies, divided social classes, funded wars, nearly wiped out an entire species, and inspired one of the greatest scientists who ever lived to give the most famous science lectures in history. All from a candle. This is the history of the candle, and it is stranger, darker, and more important than you think. To understand where this story starts, you have to understand what the dark actually meant. Not the romantic kind of dark, not the camping kind of dark, the kind of dark that existed before street lights, before electricity, before gas lamps. Once the sun set in medieval Europe, the world outside your door was genuinely, completely black, dangerous, disorienting. People didn't wander around at night. They stayed inside, huddled close, and they burned whatever they could to hold the black at bay. And for most of them, for most of recorded history, what they burned smelled absolutely terrible. The earliest candles we can trace come from ancient Egypt, around 3000 BC. But they weren't candles in any way you'd recognize. They were rushlights, dried reeds soaked in rendered animal fat. You'd light one end and walk, or prop it against a wall and hope the draft didn't take it. No wick, no holder, no wax, just a fat-soaked stick of dry grass doing its best. The Romans made the next real leap. They developed wick-based candles, rolled papyrus dipped in tallow or beeswax, and by the time Roman soldiers were marching across Europe, they were carrying candles with them. The technology traveled with the empire. But already a divide was forming. It was there from almost the very beginning, baked into the material itself. Beeswax candles burned clean. They smelled faintly of honey. They didn't drip. They didn't sputter. They were used in temples, in wealthy homes, at the altars of the most powerful religious institutions in the world. Tallow candles, made from rendered beef or sheep fat, the kind of fat you skim off a pot of soup and throw away, burned with black smoke, dripped constantly, and smelled like you were slowly cooking something old and long dead. And tallow candles were what almost everyone used for almost 1,000 years. Here's what that actually meant to live with. Tallow is solid at room temperature, the same material you'd scrape off the bottom of a roasting pan. Now imagine burning that, indoors, in every room, every night, all winter, for your entire life. Medieval people weren't disturbed by this smell. They'd grown up in it. It was simply what evening smelled like. But here's a detail that tells you everything about the social order of the time. Historians believe that wealthy homes lit by beeswax could be identified by scent alone, from the outside. Before you even knocked on the door, your nose told you whether you'd arrived somewhere important before your eyes could confirm it. By the Middle Ages, candles weren't a craft. They were an industry. Every town of any size had chandlers, and there were two kinds, tallow chandlers and wax chandlers. And those two groups despised each other with a thoroughness that would impress a modern corporate rival. In London, the Guild of Tallow Chandlers and the Guild of Wax Chandlers spent centuries in an ongoing territorial war. Who could sell where? Who had the right to supply which buildings? Who was allowed to set up a stall in which streets? Because light wasn't just light. It was a market, and the market had sides. Beeswax candles lit cathedrals and aristocratic dining rooms. Tallow candles lit everybody else. The rich burned clean. The poor burned rank. And nobody pretended otherwise. The quality of what you burned told anyone who entered your home exactly where you stood in the world. Light was status. Darkness was its own kind of poverty. But tallow had a problem beyond the smell. It melted unevenly. It dripped without warning. The wick would fold over in the heat, creating what was called candle snuff, a lump of charred material that dimmed the flame and filled the room with black smoke if you didn't catch it in time. Trimming the wick wasn't just a chore. In wealthy households, it was a full-time job. There were servants whose sole responsibility was to maintain the candles through an evening, trimming, replacing, managing the light so the family could simply exist in it. Nobody found this strange, because nobody had ever known it to be different. And through all of this, remember that 10% figure. That's what the working class paid for tallow. The bad ones, the ones that smelled and dripped and went out, that was 10%. The beeswax candles that the wealthy burned, for most ordinary people, those were simply not an option. Then, in the 18th century, something happened that changed everything and eventually destroyed itself in the process. Whalers, primarily American whalers, working out of ports like New Bedford, Massachusetts, and Nantucket, made a discovery inside the enormous blunt heads of sperm whales, a waxy, crystalline substance called spermaceti. When processed, it produced a candle unlike anything the world had seen before. It burned cleaner than tallow, brighter than beeswax. It didn't soften in summer heat. It didn't drip. It produced almost no smell, almost no smoke. Benjamin Franklin, who tried one in 1751, wrote to a friend that he was astonished by this new kind of candle that offered a clear white light and lasted far longer than anything he'd used before. George Washington calculated that burning a spermaceti candle every night for a full year would cost roughly 8 pounds. He noted this as evidence it was well beyond the reach of most Americans. And he was right. But demand held anyway among those who could manage it because the difference was simply that dramatic. The whaling industry exploded. By 1770, American whalers were producing spermaceti candles at a scale that had made New Bedford one of the wealthiest cities in the country. Fortunes were made. Entire coastal economies were built around the harvest of sperm whales. The first genuinely clean, bright, odorless candle the world had ever produced was also the most expensive, and the industry that supplied it was hunting its raw ingredient toward extinction. By the early 1800s, the evidence was unmistakable. Sperm whale populations had been decimated. Ships had to travel farther, stay out longer, return with fewer whales. The spermaceti candle, the first clean candle, in every sense of the word, was already dying of its own success. If you've made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Now, back to the story. In the 1820s, a French chemist named Michel Eugène Chevreul made a discovery in a laboratory that would eventually do what a century of whaling never quite managed: put a clean, affordable candle in the hands of ordinary people. Working with animal fats, Chevreul figured out how to separate the fatty acids in tallow. One of those acids, stearic acid, behaved in a completely different way from the raw material it came from. It burned hard. It burned clean. It burned slowly, with no dripping and no rancid smell. Chevreul and his colleague Joseph Louis Gay-Lussac patented the process in 1825. Within years, the first commercial stearine candles were being manufactured in France. No more black drips, no more wick trimming, no more rooms that smelled like a slaughterhouse. Stearine candles burned the way beeswax did, clean and long. But they cost a fraction of the price. For the first time in thousands of years, the clean candle wasn't a luxury. It was just a candle. And here's the part history books almost never mention. The factories that produced stearine candles in 19th century France were predominantly staffed by women, working-class women who had previously labored in tallow chandleries. Brutal, stinking, exhausting work were now operating cleaner, more mechanized production lines. But they weren't just labor. Many of them became expert technicians, adjusting chemical ratios, refining mold designs, solving the specific production problems that made a candle burn the way it was supposed to. The modern candle, the clean, even-burning, reliably affordable candle, was built by women whose names are almost entirely lost to history. Also in 1834, a pewter worker named Joseph Morgan patented a machine capable of producing 1,500 candles per hour. Mass production had arrived. And then, in the 1850s, chemist James Young developed a method for extracting paraffin wax from coal and oil. Paraffin was odorless. It burned long. It was cheaper than anything that had come before. Combined with stearine to raise its melting point, it became the foundation of the modern candle industry. The candle that had been for most of human history either unaffordable or unbearable to live with was now within reach of nearly everyone. The 10% was finally coming down. In December 1848, one of the greatest scientists who ever lived stood in a lecture hall at the Royal Institution in London and chose, of all the subjects he could have selected, a candle. This was Michael Faraday, the man who discovered electromagnetism, the man who laid the experimental foundation for the understanding of electric and magnetic fields that would eventually directly make Edison's light bulb possible. And what he chose to present to a room full of young people as a doorway into the study of natural philosophy was a burning candle. He said, "There is no better, there is no more open door by which you can enter into the study of natural philosophy than by considering the physical phenomena of a candle." His 6-lecture series, The Chemical History of a Candle, became the most famous science lectures in history. He walked his audience through combustion chemistry, capillary action, the 3 distinct zones of a candle flame, why the light comes from the top of the flame and not the middle, what happens to the wax as it disappears, where it goes. Every question opened into another question. Every answer cracked a door onto an entire field of science. The lectures were published in book form in 1861 and have never gone out of print. One of the greatest scientific minds the world has ever produced thought that the candle, that object that smelled like death in a poor household and honey in a rich one, that object whose production nearly wiped out the sperm whale, was the most instructive thing he could show a young person who wanted to understand the physical world. He wasn't wrong. Then in 1879, Thomas Edison demonstrated a working incandescent light bulb, and within a generation, it was over. By 1920, electric lighting was standard in most American cities. The candle industry, one of the oldest continuous industries in human civilization, one that had outlasted empires and plagues and the collapse of Rome, nearly collapsed overnight. And nobody really mourned it, because electricity was extraordinary. Clean, bright, steady, available at the turn of a switch. Everything the candle had never quite managed to be. But something strange happened. People kept buying candles anyway. Not because they needed them, not because the power was out. For atmosphere, for ritual, for the specific quality of a flame moving in air, alive in a way that electric light, for all its brilliance, simply isn't. Psychologists have a name for what happens when you watch a candle flame. They call it flame gaze. The way a flickering light activates the same meditative mental state as flowing water or rustling leaves. A quality of attention that modern humans discovered, somewhat urgently, that they were missing. The candle industry didn't die with electricity. It transformed. Today, it's a $3.2 billion industry in the United States alone. We have LED lights that can simulate every color of the visible spectrum. We have screens that emit more lumens than anything a medieval chandler could have imagined. And we still buy candles, by the millions, every year. The candle has outlasted everything that was supposed to replace it. Oil lamps, gaslighting, electrification. It outlasted the sperm whale industry it accidentally built. It outlasted the guilds that fought territorial wars over its supply. It outlasted the class system that encoded your social standing in the quality of your wax. Because here is what the candle actually was underneath all of it. It was a marker of time. The wealthy burned beeswax candles measured by the inch, each inch corresponding to 1 hour. They literally watched time disappear. It was a measure of status. For 1,000 years, every visitor to your home knew your place in the world before they sat down, just from what you were burning. It was a scientific instrument that the man who invented the conceptual framework for electromagnetic theory believed was the most powerful teaching tool he had ever held. And it was built in its modern, affordable, democratic form, largely by working women whose names history did not bother to record. If you enjoyed today's episode, hit the subscribe button, drop a like, and let us know in the comments what object you want us to uncover next. Every room you've ever walked into has a story. Next week, we'll tell it.